It's the language of my wife. പക്ഷേ എനിക്ക് സംസാരിക്കും നല്ല സംസാരിക്കും അറിയില്ല. So forgive me for speaking in English. I realize that that is a great disadvantage in this venue, and I really wish that I could speak to you in Malayalam. But we will make do with English, as we have been doing at the university level for a long time. I would like to thank Professor Thorat for inviting me here. As you know, any invitation from him is like a command for us, and we cannot, there's no question of. So I'm very happy to be here. I'm always happy to be in Kerala. I am also thank Professor Komat, Professor Dinesan, and other colleagues at this university who have been so gracious in their hospitality already, and I've barely arrived. I must begin with a word of explanation. As you will see from my title, Social Science in the Age of Alternative Facts doesn't relate very directly or very obviously to the theme of this colloquium. I thought about this, but I felt that I should still speak on this theme. One, because it has been obsessing me, and two, because I think we now, in the climate that we live in today, political climate, economic climate, and in more generally the climate of ideas that we live in today, dominant ideas, I think we have forgotten how much we depended on state-supported institutions like the university. So what is happening today and what I'm going to talk about is the complete transformation, and transformation is a deliberately polite and neutral word to use for what is happening. This entire ecosystem on which we depended to talk about marginality and issues like that, to raise such issues from within the academy, or at least sections of the academy, that whole ecosystem is being ravaged today. So we are suffering a massive climate crisis, if you like, in academics, in the world of ideas. And this is happening in radically new ways. Some of these ways are not so new, but the way in which they are being deployed is new. In short, to cut a long story short, our own vocabulary and our own claimed standpoints are being taken over. So we have across the world today deeply right-wing, proto-fascist movements of various kinds that are speaking the language of empowerment, that are speaking the language of representing the neglected. Right? It's happening in our country as well. We are no exception to this. So the very language of marginality, the very language of exclusion is being hijacked. And we were so used to having a monopoly on this language, and those who tried to claim this space were safely relegated to the margins, the fringes as we call them. The fringes today have been elected to power, not only in India, in many countries. So they control the state, and they are using the state to devastating effect. And the entire institution that we knew as the university, despite all its many shortcomings, provided for us a very, very vital space from where to raise questions about marginality and to bring our collective intellectual forces to bear on problems of this sort. To mixed effect, we have had successes, we have had failures, but on the whole, it has been very, very exceptional. It has been very valuable. That whole possibility is not only being taken away from us, there are now indications of a serious reversal that is happening. I will only offer you the most prominent example, only because it was considered to be the gold standard of so-called liberal education, the American university. The elite American university is in ruins today, and it has taken a few months, just a few months, to bring this powerful edifice that at some level we all admired, and at some level we all recognized for the massive contributions that it has made, including to Voices of Resistance. It has done a lot of other things, the elite American university, and we know that as well, but it has also contributed to our language, so to speak, our concerns. And that whole edifice, it did not take more than just a few months, and a determined elected dictator to overturn all of this. And who would have thought that Columbia University could be reduced to, it's a situation that regional universities in India, particularly if they happen to be ruled by parties that are not in power at the center, they are at the receiving end of such things all the time. And I don't need to tell you about that in Kerala in particular, right? That could happen to Columbia. On the other hand, as a footnote, did you know that the US government, the federal government, invested $400 million in Columbia University? I certainly didn't know that. So the very idea of a private university, many of us always thought that there's really no such thing as private anything in this world. If you really, scratch hard enough, you will discover the public roots of everything that is private, except for profits, of course. So that's just an aside. So this is what I want to talk about. We are now at the site in the wrong. It feels like we are in the wrong place at the wrong time. And here my heart goes out to young people who are beginning their careers today. When we began our careers, we had, compared to today, a lot more room to grow, a lot more room to learn. You are being denied that, and you are being thrust into a fiercely hostile world right from the beginning. This is your generational luck, or your, and in a sense, for us all, a giant Rahu Kalam has started, and we have to deal with it. So I want to talk about the very idea of social science at a time when something called alternative facts has suddenly become powerful. Let's start with getting the obvious things out of the way. First, alternative facts are not new. In politics, there has always been contestation over facts, and therefore we have always had alternative facts. But the kind of alternative facts that rule today defy all of established senses of the words like evidence, objectivity, verifiability, proof, and so on, and appear to bring out the worst that might be implied by phrases like a post-truth era. So what I propose to do in the next few minutes is to give you a very brief potted history of both, on the one hand, the two main terms in my title. On the one hand, the social sciences. Where are we today? The history of the present of the social sciences. And on the other hand, this thing called alternative facts, which I'm using as a placeholder, as a kind of label for a much larger worldview that is dominant today. Where did that come from, and what is happening with that? So let's start with alternative facts, the less familiar, the newer phenomenon. As you know, the phrase itself originates in early 2016, January 2016, and it was first used and made world famous overnight by the press secretary, one of the press secretaries for President Trump in his first term, Kellyanne Conway, who has become an overnight celebrity, and you can't help feel sorry for her a little, when she used this term alternative facts. The dispute was about the number of people attending the inauguration of President Trump the first time, and the claim was that it was the largest in history. The Trump camp was claiming that it was the largest in history. Unfortunately, a claim that was easily disprovable. and was contested by the media and called for a lot of ridicule. There were so many jokes around this phrase. I would like to flag right off that ridicule is a very bad idea for us. It is a very unproductive idea, and we should not, of course, humor has its place, and especially now, many times humor is our only refuge, but it should not become our principal response, right? We need to move beyond ridicule. So that's the immediate origin of alternative facts, but this is also this era marks the birth of a new kind of knowledge. And that new kind of knowledge is born of a kind of perfect storm, as they say, where so many unlikely events happen at the same time, coincide, and together create a synergy that creates something entirely new on a scale unimagined. That's what, roughly speaking, a perfect storm is. So what has come together? What has come together is the rise in fortunes of ideologies that have been present, at least in our country, for at least 1 century in an organized form, and where the proponents of this ideology have so far been relatively marginal until the last 3 decades, let's say, until the 1980s. This part of the history is well known for our country, but roughly similar things are true of many other countries as well. So there was this ideology, this worldview that was very far from power. It was nowhere near power. And yet the votaries of this ideology were persistently on a so slow scale trying to create a community of believers. Now, over time and for various other reasons, various other parts of this perfect storm, these have struck a very fertile patch today. Suddenly, they have struck a very fertile, they have discovered a very fertile time, and their grip on large numbers. We can debate whether it's an actual majority or not, and as you know, the term majority in India is always a loaded term. There's no way of getting away from it. So that is not the point. The point is that large numbers now believe in this ideology. So the point I'm making is that one part of this perfect storm has been the steady creation of what I like to call a promotion of a certain culture of credulity. The English word credulity, its modern meaning, at least since the 17th century, credulousness has been used in a slightly pejorative sense, as someone who is too quick to believe. Credulity is believing something, but the original pre-17th century meaning of the word was not pejorative. Right? It was simply concerned with the act of belief, what induces belief. Today it is used for somebody who believes too quickly, too easily. Right? But what is important is that we are now in the presence of a culture of such credulity. That is to say, a collective, a shared cultivation of a particular kind of credulity. And I think we lose track of this. It is very tempting to point fingers at technology. So it is very tempting in our context particularly to say that WhatsApp is the source of most of our miseries today. But I think that we are placing the cart before the horse. Yes, WhatsApp is very important, and that is also part of this perfect storm. Imagine how recent it is, and especially for those of us who are older, who are ancient, there are some of us in this room, we can actually trace this as a late development in our lives. But for many of you, you are born into this era. Right? So this is the era of the marriage of communication technology and miniaturized devices like the mobile phone. We often say that the Gujarat 2002 riots were our first mobile phone riots. All riots in India are organized, and mobile phones provide a very powerful way of organizing. By the same token, the 2014 elections were our first WhatsApp election. 2009 is the year when WhatsApp is incorporated in the United States. It comes to India, I'm not sure, either 2011 or 2012. People differ on when it came into India. But everybody is sure that by 2016, India is the largest market for WhatsApp. And the second, it is more than 4 times larger than the second largest market, which is Brazil. So WhatsApp becomes enormously influential, and not just in India, but across the world. And this is documented. There are many books on this and so on. So you have, on the one hand, a steady cultivation of a culture of credulity, and you have, on the other hand, the arrival of a technology for instant dissemination. The marriage of these two, the confluence of these two, creates a new kind of knowledge. A kind of knowledge whose claim to legitimacy is based on number. This is the knowledge that is legitimized by its having gone viral. This phrase, going viral, is now recognized as a touchstone of some kind, a standard of some kind. So we have a community that is being taught to believe certain things, who are now being fed in the most efficient manner possible incessant messages reinforcing their worldviews. Yes, it is claimed that the same technology can also offer room for resistance. I'll speak more about that towards the end. But right now, it's clear that the dominant side has not been the one of resistance, that the dominant side has been the one that has in fact given legitimacy to the going viral school of thought. So now you have a new kind of knowledge where just because something has been forwarded 3.8 lakh times, which in our country can happen relatively easily, it acquires a certain legitimacy, a certain authority, and it becomes knowledge. After all, what is knowledge? It is a kind of belief. We can get into the philosophical distinctions between knowing and believing, but for this community which has been cultivated to believe in certain things, that distinction is collapsed. So if knowing is supposed to be evidence-based or premises given to evidence, and if believing is supposed to be experience-based or premises given to experience, these two are collapsed, and we have now unshakable belief as truth in things that are in the past would not have been it would not have been so easy to claim. The point, though, is that there have always been people who have claimed this, right? But they have been in the margins, and we have been able to ridicule them. We have been able to make fun of them. Today, it's possible that they are ministers in the union government. It's possible that they are powerful bureaucrats. It's possible that they are in positions of immense power. So that changes the game entirely, as we are discovering. So you have this regime of alternative facts that has a carefully cultivated constituency that has been taught to believe, and it is this primary step, the creation of a community that is ready to believe that all Muslims are terrorists, or you know the sort of beliefs that they'll be, and then you have this technology that can supply, keep refueling, so to speak. It's the opposite of the mobile phone recharge, right? Recharge is particularly for students are a cause of some anxiety. You're thinking how much data do you have left, you're always worried about that. This is the opposite of that. You're constantly being provided a recharge for your beliefs, free of cost, right? So that is the story of alt facts. And we have this unprecedented situation today across the world where the fringe elements who have always been there to support these kinds of facts, alternative facts, are in power today and are in a position to implement their agendas backed by the state. This is the moment, and I'll use this to move into the question of the social sciences and the history of the social sciences. This is the moment when I think we need to be more self-reflexive and think about how much really we have depended on state support in the past. I think we need an honest appraisal of that. However much we may have dissented, we may have protested against state policies, the state nevertheless protected us. We are realizing that now today, when the state is doing the opposite, when the state has become a predator on universities. So let's talk a little about the social sciences. Again, this is a potted history and there are lots of details and nuances I'm not getting into. We have the most unique period in the history of the world, particularly history of the developed world, after World War II. After 1945 to the early 1970s is a historically unprecedented period of 3 decades of unbroken prosperity, continuous prosperity. That has never happened before. There has always been ups and downs in the global capitalist economy, but this is one period where the main parts, it's not true of the entire world, but the main part of the world, the developed part of the world, major part of the world economy, so to speak, experienced unbroken prosperity. And this was the era of Keynesian economics and social democracy. So the marriage of social democracy and Keynesian demand management brought a successful macro management strategy that created prosperity. However, over time, over these 3 decades, problems with that strategy accumulated, and again there was this coincidence of various things like the oil crisis, the creation of OPEC, various other wars, various things happened. In the 70s, this broke down, and by then many states, many welfare states had overstretched themselves. Deficits were very high, rates of government borrowing were reached very high levels, and there was indeed an economic crisis. So this is the time when a new, not so new, but when this old philosophy came into power, which we call neoliberalism. The term neoliberalism is often used, particularly I suppose in Kerala, as a term of abuse. And once again, I would want to caution you against that, because ridicule, abuse, these are easy. You know, they are the easy way out. And I think we should use it as a descriptive term to refer to something concrete, something that you can describe by a set of attributes. And again, cutting a long story short, neoliberalism is the idea backed by, at that time, solid evidence, partial evidence, but then all theories are backed by partial evidence, backed by solid evidence of a narrow kind, which said that the market is the only human institution that can be demonstrated to be entirely objective, as long as it is not interfered with. If you leave markets alone, they produce rational outcomes. And this was argued very rigorously with a lot of evidence and so on. And ironically, the evidence that really made this neoliberal ideology hegemonic came from the stock market. And later to become its chief problem. The same stock market became the reason for its decline. But at that time, early 70s, so we had already economists like, philosophers and economists like Hayek, Friedrich von Hayek, Milton Friedman, and a lesser known figure but very important for the legitimation of the neoliberal view, Edward Farmer, the financial economist who established this. So we had neoliberalism as an intellectually respectable stance which emphasized the market. And this was also provided a handy contrast to the social democracy model of Keynesian demand management. And so we had the cutting back of social sector spending across the globe. And this included funding for education. Some islands held out against this, Europe as a whole more or less, but particularly Western Europe and most notably, of course, Scandinavia, held out against this and held on to their basic social democratic model. So we have had 4 decades of neoliberalism, and that has had cumulative effects. Just as 3 decades of Keynesianism produced problems, now we have 4 decades of neoliberalism with its accumulated problems. And we have an emaciated social sector that can no longer perform the function of alleviating or putting band-aid on the wounds of predatory finance capital, and therefore we have breakdowns and we have crisis. So we are whether or not we are in a post-truth world, we are definitely in a post-neoliberal world. The term post is used in these contexts, like post-colonial or post-truth and so on, does not mean that the old thing is gone away, it has become irrelevant. It simply means that its hegemony is gone. So it is no longer hegemonic, but that doesn't mean its power is gone. Its power is very much there, but it's no longer hegemonic in the sense that everybody believes that that's the right thing. It's now more of a pragmatic thing, that we don't have Tina, there is no alternative, is more the reason. Against this background, we have in the social sciences, in the 60s, but noticeably in the 70s, very powerful, again, extremely well argued, successfully argued, anti-foundationalist movements of various kinds. There are various labels that are used for this: post-structuralism, postmodernism, and so on. Again, often used as terms of abuse. And again, I would like to say that that's not a good idea. The anti-foundationalism of that came out of firstly linguistics and varieties of structuralism, and then philosophy, and then later on into media studies, and partly the social sciences, anthropology, and disciplines like that, was a very successful, intellectually successful move. We must remember that. The arguments made were persuasive. What was needed after that was recognizing the problems that were raised by the anti-foundationalists and returning to a less naive and a less smug or self-assured sense of social scientific truth as always partial, but that does not mean that all partial truths are the same, that there is no reason to choose between them. We needed to think more carefully and more responsibly about the reasons why we would prefer this partial truth over that partial truth. And not enough effort went into that, at least not immediately. So there was disarray, there was a lot of name calling across groups, talking past each other. And we have reached a stage today where the claim of the social sciences, their claims are treated with much more suspicion and doubt than before. And it is in this climate of doubt that the other side, the alternative facts side, was able to exploit and gain traction, as they say, and gain hegemony. Yeah, that's okay. Time should okay. Okay, that's the social sciences. Let me now step back again and come at the university from a different angle. And here my story is very simple, it's very stark, and again I apologize to the young people for underlining all the darkness that surrounds their futures. Don't shoot the messenger. Right? I'm only telling you the way it is, and I feel for you. I recognize that the world is being very unfair to you. We had 2 good answers to the question, what is higher education good for? Right? One was an instrumentalist answer, a pragmatic answer, and crudely put, higher education is good for getting better jobs. That if you pass through higher education, you'll get a better job, a more decent job with better pay, better working conditions, and you might even get to do something that you like, right? Which is pretty rare in the world of work. So that was the answer. one answer. The other answer, the more idealist answer, non-instrumental answer, was roughly speaking liberal education. That if you have a higher education, you become a better human being. You become better informed, you become less ethnocentric, you become more broad-minded, and in short, you become a better citizen. Again, both this also had some evidence to support it. Both these answers have suffered irreparable damage today. So we have had an era, particularly in India and China, not seen before in the history of the human race. We have had a massive expansion of higher education. The number of people who have entered higher education, first generation entrance into higher education in India and China, has no precedent in human history. So at the same time that India in particular was experiencing a demographic bulge, you have heard all about that, right? Where the college-going age group was proportionately higher than ever before in Indian history. At the same time, the higher education sector was expanding. Very nice, very good, great. But because of the 4 decades of neoliberalism, because of the changes that the world economy and therefore the Indian economy has also gone through, and primarily, again cutting a long story short, primarily because of this thing called financialization, we have now a situation in the world economy where it is possible to produce profit without creating jobs. After all, this was the reason why Marx praised capitalism, because he felt that the fate of the working class and the fate of the capitalist class were tied together, and that capitalism would, despite itself, create the conditions for its own supersession. That link has been broken today. So it is possible for capital to show profits. It has been doing so. It has been, including in our country, it has been doing so without creating jobs. Because financial products are, as you know, virtual products. And the kind of labor they require and the quantity of labor they require bears no comparison with the old-fashioned. Marxism is a theory of the manufacturing sector. And the manufacturing sector today is secondary. So we have to rethink Marxism itself. Right? So we have had massification of higher education at the same time that we have a demographic bulge in the young people, in the young age groups, and we have had a job loss growth in India. So we have more people with higher educational degrees than ever before, and the proportion of them getting good jobs is smaller than ever before. Right? So what ought to have been a very happy coincidence, the expansion of the education sector precisely at the time when there was an expansion in the customer, so to speak, so you have the pragmatic answer to the question, what is higher education good for, is today full of doubt. In fact, we have been thrown back. Higher education in the history of the world, the coming of higher education was a great boon for capitalism because it fed the ideology of meritocracy. That higher education was what meritocracy was based on, because you had credentials, you had proven credentials with formal study, etc. Objective reasons why X should be paid more than Y, etc. Right? That's what meritocracy is supposed to be. Now, that has broken down. So you have higher education credentials, but the market is offering you only to become, what is the word they use? A partner with an aggregator, right? Basically, you delivering food or something like that after a bachelor's degree, definitely, perhaps even a master's degree. So this is a major blow to the credibility, to the prestige of higher education. Let's look at the other answer, the non-instrumental answer for broadening of the mind, liberal education, and so on. Today, the idea of liberal education is not just not wanted, it is hated. Which is what we are seeing, the most vicious form of it we are seeing in the United States today, where the very DEI model has become the reason for attack. Right? So where you are claiming the language of exclusion to end all inclusive policies and to reverse them, not just end them, to reverse them. And you are doing so successfully. This is the point I keep making. There were always people who wanted this kind of thing, but they were never taken seriously. They had no power. Today, they occupy the highest offices of power, not just in our country, in Turkey, Hungary, across the world, many countries, this is happening. So both our answers to what is higher education good for are failing today. So the prestige of higher education is at a very low ebb today. And this is the time when the social sciences too are in a phase where they need renewal, where we need to talk about the partial truths, that we always deal with partial truths. Even what we thought were solid, proven, God-given truths, today we know them to be partial, and that we need to rely on ourselves. We thought that scientific method was a kind of God. It was a peg on which you hung your arguments. You had no responsibility. As long as you were using scientific method, you were like guaranteed to be the good guys. That's not true. It was never true, actually. So we need, I now move to what should we be doing. I've already said what doesn't work. Ridicule doesn't work. It makes you feel good, but it doesn't make you feel good for long. That also you will have discovered by now, I think. The other thing that will not work, and which unfortunately I see many of my comrades also sometimes falling for, wanting to turn back the clock. Just bring back the old days. We will be fine. No, we will not be fine. There was a lot wrong with the old days, and we need to, with open eyes, accept those. Of course, the present that we are in is much worse than the worst of the old days. But still, the old days were not a golden age. The very idea of a golden age, I think we should try and give up on. It's a dangerous idea. Whenever you hear of a golden age being referred to, please become more suspicious. That's the way to do social science, right? So you become. And we need to recognize what we can do well in the social sciences and try and do it as well as we can. What do we do well in the social sciences? I think we do very well at providing context. There has been a lot of nonsense, positivist nonsense, about the distinction between description and analysis. This is a false distinction. There can be no analysis without description. Description is always the first step of scientific inquiry. And don't be fooled when the description is done with numbers. It's still description, right? So description and analysis are inseparable, and we need good descriptions. And descriptions, in large part, are about context. You make sense of things by re-embedding them in the context in which they became effective, in which they became what they are, in which they became the reason, they became what we ought to take seriously, right? So we need to embed things back in their context, and the social sciences have always been very good at providing context. So we should begin by providing context to the phenomenon that we don't like. All these people who are suddenly in power with all these alternative facts. We need to understand who are these people, why, and it's not helpful to simply say they are idiots and so on, right? Why do they believe what they believe? What need are these new beliefs fulfilling? Is there another way of fulfilling those needs, addressing those needs? So one thing is to provide context, more context. And I'm a great believer in this. In fact, I think my own discipline of sociology could well be called contextology. That's what if we do sociology well, that's what we do. We provide context. What further can we do? We can promote, the social sciences are good at this also, because they have to be, they are forced to be. It's a necessity that we turn into a virtue. Self-reflexive. We need accounts of the past that honestly mention the mistakes we made, the things that we left out, the things that we excluded, and so on. Because in part, the present is what it is today because we contributed to it. It's an uncomfortable idea. You don't want to have anything to do with what is happening today. But yes, you have to, in a larger sense, collectively, we have been, in part at least, responsible for what is happening today. And we must carefully look at that. So self-reflexivity is another thing that the social sciences do well. We have to be necessarily self-reflexive because we don't have the luxury of the natural sciences, where the natural world, the scientist does not inhabit the natural world. So the scientist doesn't need to worry that rocks will start shaping his mind. The geologist doesn't have to worry that rocks will mess with his mind. We have to constantly worry that the people we study, given the fact, I always tell my students, please always believe that your respondent is at least 3 times more intelligent than you are. Start with that assumption. It's a very safe assumption. Usually the multiple is higher, but and very, very rarely it will be slightly lower. But you will rarely find a respondent who is in the true sense less intelligent than you are. And I'm not talking about how many marks you got in some examination. I'm talking about understanding the world. So if you begin with this kind of humility, you have to be self-reflexive. You have to worry about whether your respondents are shaping your conclusions, right? In ways that they ought not to be. Maybe there are ways in which they ought to shape your results. So self-reflexivity is another thing that we are good at. And finally, something that we haven't been good at, but I think we should now become better at, is in acknowledging fallibility. Despite following the best methods that we know at the time, we can still be completely wrong sometimes. Right? Nobody sets out to be wrong, just as no film director sets out to make a flop film. Everybody wants to make a hit film, but as we know, very few films are hit films. So using the same analogy, we are often just wrong. And recognizing that we are wrong is a very big step forward. And I think part of what social science should be, that social science should be the science of learning from mistakes, knowing that you're always going to be making mistakes. What we should aim at is to make our mistakes productive mistakes, mistakes that we can learn from. So these are, broadly speaking, I'm necessarily being very abstract and very general, but these are the 3 broad things that I feel the social sciences can do very well. Provide context, be self-reflexive, and acknowledge fallibility, and therefore, acknowledging fallibility, take the responsibility of choosing between partial truths, right? Because all partial truths are not the same. We need to provide our own reasons, not hang it on something called scientific method and absolve ourselves. We need to say, I prefer this partial truth over that partial truth because XYZ, in a transparent manner so that others can argue with us, our colleagues can argue with us, and that we can together make some headway even in these dark times. So once again, especially for the young people, my apologies for not offering you more silver linings, but very thin silver linings that I can offer today.